This is our third video about percents and proportions, and so this time we're going to look at how to find the percent given the part and the whole. So the first video is find the part given the whole in percent, and then the second video was find the whole given the part in percent. So now we're going to find the percent given the part and the whole, and then we will know how to find any piece that is missing. So here are our vocabulary words. These are the same as we've had for the last few videos. So there they are again in case you need them with the definitions though. And then this again is our steps of how to use proportions to solve percent. So it's exactly the same. We're just finding a new part this time. So we're finding the percent part. And so one thing that's really important to remember is that when you're finding percents, really, if you just set up the part to whole as a fraction and you change that fraction to a percent, it's the exact same thing. So you've been doing this since Unit 1 and you just didn't even realize it. But remember, if I set up a part to whole relationship like this, then remember this fraction bar really means division. So the part would be divided by the whole, and you can change it to a decimal, and then you can move the decimal 2 places to the right or multiply it by 100 to find what percent equivalent that is. So that's another way you can do this, and you have been doing this already since Unit 1, and you just maybe didn't realize it. So this is just kind of help you remember that. But if I wanted to use the proportion, let's say, then this might be an example of what it would ask you. It would say, what percent, so that's what I'm trying to figure out, I don't know, is 13, so that's the part of 26, of the whole 26. So when I set this up, I would have 13 to 26, so I know 13 is the part of 26, then I want to know what the percent equivalent is. Okay, so, whoops, that's supposed to be an equal sign. So 100, again, is going in the denominator because that is the whole, and then I'm trying to figure out what percent that is now. So I could simplify if you wanted this down, because right now 26 to 100, I can't multiply by a whole number to get there. So let's just simplify this down, and 1326 actually simplifies to 1/2 because 26 is divisible by 13. So 13 times 2 is 26, so this would simplify to 1/2. So if I use 1/2 and set that equal to 100, and some of you might already be like, oh, I know 1/2 is a percent, that should be 50. So you might not even have to use the proportion to set it up, but this is what you would do if you needed to. So 2 times 50 is 100, meaning 1 times 50 would make that equal to 50%. So 13 is 50% of 26. One thing that's very important is to make sure you include the percent symbol, because 50 and 50% is very different. Okay, so make sure that you always include that so that it communicates that you understand what that number is. So this next example, what percent is 60 of 80? So I want to know 60 is the part, 80 is the whole, and what percent would 60 out of 80 be equivalent to? So I could set it up as 60 to 80 like this, and I would make that equivalent to d% over 100 like this. And so right now, 60 to 80, well, I can't really go from 80 to 100 by multiplying, so I would probably want to simplify this down. And so if I wanted to simplify this down, I could get 6/8 if I just simplify by 10. If I simplified by 20, I would get 3/4. Okay, so let's go with that one, because 8 cannot get me to 100 by multiplying, but 4 can. So if I use 3/4, and again, some of you might say, oh, well, 3/4, I know what that's equivalent to as a percent. So if you know it from there, you can just stop and make that equivalency right there and put the percent symbol. But if you don't, this is how you could figure it out also. So 4 times 25 is 100. So 3 times 25 would be 75. So 60 is 75. Again, don't forget your percent symbol, percent of 80. Okay, and then the last one is what percent is 4 of 5? So I just want to know 4 is the part, 5 is the whole, and what percent would that be equivalent to? So I would have 4 to 5, and I want to know that is equivalent to what percent? So I would say, oh, well, 5 times 20 is 100. So 4 times 20 would give me the equivalent percent. So 4 times 20 is 80. So this is 80%. Let's say you wanted to just change 4/5 to a percent by dividing. So I'll show you how you can use the other way that we've been doing so far this year. So if I divided, since 4 is in the numerator, that goes inside, 5 goes outside. And so when I divide them like this, 5 does not go into 4, right? So there are no groups of 5 and 4. So I would have to add a decimal and a 0 in order to keep going. Make sure you bring the decimal point straight up, and it's really important to line all your digits up properly. So 5 goes into 40 now. Imagine 8 times, and that's exactly 40. So cool, we get no remainders, and we're done with that division. So now if I wanted to change this decimal to a percent, you can multiply by 100, or you're really moving the decimal place over 2, and you have to add a 0, which is also how you're getting 80%, okay? Remember, the reason we can just move the decimal over 2 places is because this is the tenths place and this is the hundredths place. Because percents are out of 100, you want to move the decimal past the hundredths place, and that is the percent equivalent. So these are just a lot of options for you of how you can do this. That's the cool thing about proportions and ratios, is that it's kind of a lot of ways to think about it. And so you can find the one that works best for you, and then hopefully you can feel really confident and successful. So here is just an example of a word problem maybe that they would ask you to find what percent of something. So it says 22 out of 88 students play tennis. What percent of students play tennis? So if I know 22 out of, so obviously 22 would have to be the part, out of 88 is the whole, and I want to know what percent of students is that playing tennis. So when I set up my proportion, I can do 22 over 88 like this. So the part to whole, and I want to know what percent that's equivalent to. Okay, so you can either solve the proportion, you would have to simplify 22/88. So you can actually simplify that by 22, because 22 times 4 is 88. So that would be 1/4. Okay, and you can use that as your equivalent ratio to make your proportion to solve. And so 4 times 25 is 100. 1 times 25 is 25, of course. So this would be 25% of the students are playing tennis, if 22 out of 88 of them are playing tennis. You can also, if you simplify this down and get to 1/4, and you just divided 1/4 and got 0.25 and then change that to a decimal, you could do that. Or if you divided 22 by 88, let's say, and you figured it out that it's also equivalent to 0.25, which you could then change to a percent. There's a lot of different ways, but if you want to just stick with the proportion to practice that, that's great. If you like to change it using division, then that's also great too. So let's say they threw this in. If this question was 22 out of 88 students play tennis, what percent of students do not play tennis? Well, if we just figured out that 25% do play tennis, that means that 75% do not play tennis. So you would have to subtract it from 100 in order to figure out what the other percent of the other students who are not playing tennis is. So that's how you could figure that out. And we've seen a couple of questions like that, so that way you're making sure you're reading the question and you're answering what they're actually asking you for. So let's say in first period there are 20 students and 8 students bring their lunch. What percent of students bring their lunch? So I know that there are 20 students in first period. That would be the whole. Out of that whole, 8 of them bring their lunch. And I want to know what percent of students is that. So when I set that up, I could say 8 out of 20, or 8 to 20, is equivalent to, I don't know what percent, that's what I'm finding, out of 100. So to go from 20 to 100, I multiply by 5. So 8 times 5 would be 40. So this would be 40% of students bring their lunch. Okay. Sometimes, again, they can ask the question. There was a question really similar to this on one of our first tests. So if it said I should go back. If it said what percent of students do not bring their lunch, you would say 60. So you'd have to find the other percentage. So just be careful that you're reading the question fully so you answer what they're asking you. So here's one that you can try on your own. It says you take a quiz and you get 18 out of 25 questions correct. So what percent did you get correct? What grade would you have if the grade was just straight up by percentage? So I want you to try that one out, and you can bring it to class and we'll check it, go over it. And if you need to go back and look at any other examples or rewatch them, feel free to do that. So here's your recap. Again, these are basically the same questions as the last 2 videos. Be familiar with the proportion setup when you're working with percents, and then also make sure you know how to find a percent given a part and a whole this time. So bring your math journal with your notes and any questions to class next time, and we can go over it.